When my neighbor Delilah Thornburg destroyed my mailbox for the 7th time in 2 months, I knew it was war. But here's what she didn't know. I was about to build her the mailbox of her nightmares. 6 a.m., stumbling outside in yesterday's work clothes, the acrid smell of diesel exhaust still hanging in the morning air. My beautiful, handcrafted oak mailbox, my grandfather's design that I'd spent 3 weekends perfecting, was gone. In its place, wooden splinters scattered across the wet asphalt like confetti after a tornado. Coffee mugs slipped. Ceramic exploded against concrete with that sharp crack that makes your teeth ache. Hot liquid burned my ankles, but the real heat was building in my chest, because there she was, Delilah, backing that pristine white SUV out of her driveway, chrome bumper freshly dented and paint scraped. The taste of rage is metallic, bitter, like licking a 9-volt battery. That's when I realized she wanted to play demolition derby with my property? Fine. Time to build something she couldn't break. What would you do if someone kept destroying your property? Tell me where you're watching from. Does this happen everywhere? Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this suburban nightmare in the first place. My name's Marcus Hendricks, 52 years old, recently divorced, and honestly, moving to Willowbrook subdivision was supposed to be my fresh start. After 20 years in the Navy Seabees, that's the guys who build airstrips under enemy fire and construct bridges while people are shooting at you. Civilian life felt like it should be easy. Retirement meant trading my hard hat for a tool belt, doing handyman work around town, maybe finally having some peace. The house was perfect. A modest ranch on Maple Street with good bones and a yard that actually got morning sunlight. The kind of place where you could tinker in the garage on weekends and wave to neighbors who waved back. At least, that's what the real estate agent promised. What she didn't mention was the HOA, Willowbrook Homeowners Association, established 1987, with more rules than a military base and twice the bureaucracy. The subdivision looked like something out of a magazine. Perfectly manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, driveways so clean you could eat off them. Every house painted in one of 3 approved colors, cream, sage, or warm beige, which looked suspiciously like the other 2. And ruling over this suburban kingdom was Delilah Thornburg. Delilah was 47, a real estate agent with prestige properties, and the self-appointed neighborhood standards enforcer. Picture this. Perfectly styled blonde hair that never moved even in wind, designer workout clothes she'd never actually worked out in, and a white Cadillac Escalade that gleamed like she polished it daily, which she probably did. She also happened to be the HOA treasurer, a position she'd held for 6 years running. Unopposed, of course. The first time we met, I was installing my grandfather's mailbox design. It was beautiful. Solid oak, hand-carved details, a little peaked roof that reminded me of the cottage where Gramps taught me woodworking as a kid. The smell of cedar shavings and linseed oil still took me back to his workshop, where mistakes were learning opportunities and everything was built to last forever. I was tightening the final bolt when I heard gravel crunching behind me, designer heels on my driveway. "Excuse me," came this voice like honey poured over broken glass. "I'm Delilah Thornburg, HOA board treasurer. That mailbox is not in compliance with community standards." I straightened up, wiping sawdust from my hands. "Ma'am, I read through the HOA bylaws twice. This meets every specification: height, setback, materials." Her smile could have frozen July. "Perhaps you misunderstood the aesthetic guidelines. We maintain certain standards here. Property values, you understand." The way she said standards made it clear she wasn't just talking about mailboxes. I pulled out my phone, showed her the bylaw screenshots I'd saved. Section 4.3, natural wood construction permitted, maximum height 36 inches, earth tone staining acceptable. This checks every box. That's when her mask slipped just a fraction. "Mr. Henderson, Hendricks. Mr. Hendricks, the written rules are one thing. Community harmony is another. I'm sure a man of your background understands the importance of fitting in." The way she paused before background, like she'd done her homework and didn't like what she found. Maybe it was the Navy discharge papers she'd somehow gotten hold of, or maybe she just didn't appreciate having a blue-collar guy in her white-collar neighborhood. "The mailbox stays," I said quietly, her perfectly painted lips pursed. "We'll see about that. Good day, Mr. Hendricks." She clip-clopped back to her Escalade, but not before taking 3 photos of my mailbox with her phone. The engine purred to life, one of those luxury engines that whispered money, and she glided away. That was Tuesday. By Friday morning, my mailbox looked like it had been hit by a freight train. Post snapped in half, wooden pieces scattered across 2 yards. The flower bed Gramps always said made a house a home was torn up, tire tracks cutting deep grooves through the mulch. I called the police. Officer Jim Martinez showed up an hour later, a decent guy who actually seemed to care. But when I mentioned the HOA connection, his expression changed. "Look, Mr. Hendricks," he said, notebook closing with a soft snap. "These neighborhood disputes, they get complicated. Unless you've got video evidence or witnesses, it's just he said, she said." The cease and desist letter arrived on Monday. Thick cream paper, expensive letterhead that reeked of old money and new threats. Thornburg and Associates Legal Consulting, embossed in gold across the top like a crown. I poured myself coffee, black Navy style, and read it twice. The gist? My mailbox violated community harmony standards and constituted willful disruption of neighborhood aesthetic values. I had 72 hours to comply or face daily fines of $500. $500 per day. The paper felt expensive between my fingers, the kind of weight that screamed, "We have lawyers and you don't." But here's what 20 years of military problem-solving teaches you. When someone tries to intimidate you with paperwork, that usually means they're standing on shaky legal ground. Time for some intelligence gathering. The county courthouse smelled like old documents and broken dreams. All marble floors and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly dead. Janet, the records clerk, helped me pull the HOA incorporation papers from 1987. Public information, perfectly legal to access. Fascinating reading. The original Willowbrook bylaws were actually reasonable. Maintain your lawn, no purple houses, cars and garages, standard suburban stuff. But buried in Section 12 was pure gold. Any rule changes required formal homeowner votes, 60% approval, 30 days written notice. I cross-referenced those original rules with Delilah's current enforcement list. Turns out 90% of her sacred standards had never been officially adopted. She'd been running a dictatorship based on personal preference and expensive stationery. Back in the Navy, we had a saying, "Know your enemy's supply lines." So I requested HOA financial records next. Janet raised an eyebrow but stamped my forms. "Most folks never bother with the money trail," she said. "You'd be amazed how much cash flows through these little neighborhood governments." While waiting for those records, I started my own documentation project. Phone recordings of every Delilah conversation. Photos of every interaction, time-stamped and organized. A green military notebook, the kind we used for daily reports, became my evidence log. Tuesday brought unexpected reinforcements. Ruth Kowalski knocked on my door carrying oatmeal cookies and a folder thick as a Manhattan phone book. Ruth was 78, retired paralegal, sharp as surgical steel, and apparently my neighborhood's secret intelligence operative. "Thought you might need backup," she said, settling into my kitchen chair with the satisfied grunt of someone about to drop a bombshell. The cookies were still warm. The folder was explosive. Ruth had been quietly documenting HOA abuses for years. Photos, recordings, financial discrepancies. A one-woman surveillance operation that would make the CIA proud. "Delilah's got a system," Ruth explained, spreading evidence across my table like crime scene photos. 3 families in 5 years, all got the harassment treatment until they sold cheap and moved away. She showed me the pattern. The Watanabe family hassled over inappropriate garden choices until they fled to Phoenix. The Hendersons cited for noise violations because their teenager played guitar. Both sold to prestige properties at below-market prices. She controls the listings, manipulates the sale prices, churns the inventory, Ruth continued. Houses sell low, drag down neighborhood comps temporarily, make it easier for her preferred buyers to get in cheap. 6 months later, she flips them high. The metallic taste was back, that familiar flavor of corruption mixed with rage. This wasn't personal harassment. This was systematic gentrification for profit. That evening, diving deeper into state HOA regulations, I remembered something from my Navy legal training. Due process isn't just for criminal courts. Most HOA enforcement requires formal hearings, written notice, appeal rights. The whole intimidation game works because most homeowners don't know they have rights stronger than their mortgage agreements. Wednesday morning, I built mailbox number 2. Same grandfather's design, same careful joinery that made the wood grain sing. This time, I also installed a security camera hidden in the decorative peak, motion activated, infrared capable, broadcasting to cloud storage in real time. The craftsmanship lasted exactly 4 days. Sunday, 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion alert. I watched live footage of a dark SUV creeping up my street, headlights off, moving like a predator. Someone climbed out with a baseball bat, methodical and practiced, destroying 3 weekends of work in under 2 minutes. The license plate was obscured, but body style doesn't lie, especially when your target vehicle has a distinctive rear quarter panel dent. The same dent now perfectly illuminated in high-definition, infrared clarity. Delilah's Escalade had just signed its own confession. I smiled in the darkness, already planning my next move. She wanted to escalate? Perfect. Time to show her what a real engineer could do when properly motivated. Delilah's declaration of war arrived Thursday morning, disguised as community concern. A petition taped to my front door like a legal scarlet letter. Willowbrook residents demand action against disruptive neighbor. The accusations read like fiction: illegal home business, excessive noise, aggressive behavior toward community members. 12 signatures, though I only recognized 3 names and half looked suspiciously similar in handwriting. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, not from fear, from pure distilled rage. By noon, the bureaucratic avalanche began. City Noise Ordinance Office called first, then business licensing, then code enforcement. Someone had filed a coordinated attack of complaints: unlicensed construction business, loud parties, unauthorized structures violating setback requirements. Each call meant an inspection. Each inspection meant time off work, explaining to board officials that I wasn't running a criminal enterprise, just a retiree who fixed neighbors' leaky faucets for beer money. The harassment was methodical, professional, and clearly orchestrated. My hands tasted metallic as I bit my nails, watching Inspector Number 3 measure my flower bed with a laser device that probably cost more than my truck. That evening, desperation drove me to Jorge Santos's door. Jorge was my neighbor 2 houses down, had kids who loved playing in my yard because I'd fixed their swing set last month. More importantly, his Ring doorbell system covered half the street like a digital watchtower. "This is getting insane, man," Jorge said, leading me into his garage that reeked of motor oil and electronic components. Circuit boards covered his workbench like metallic confetti. "Maria and I have been talking. What they're doing to you is wrong." Jorge pulled up security footage from the past week, his fingers dancing across keyboard shortcuts with programmer precision. Frame by frame, we watched Delilah's propaganda tour, house after house, clipboard in hand, gesturing toward my property while shaking her head with practiced concern. "She told Mrs. Patterson you were running some construction scam," Jorge explained, fast-forwarding through timestamps. "Said you were tanking property values and the HOA needed decisive action before the whole neighborhood suffered." But Jorge's paranoia, occupational hazard of cybersecurity work, had created something beautiful: automatic cloud backup of all surveillance data. Delilah had no idea her manipulation campaign was being archived in high definition. "I also walk my dog with this," Jorge grinned, pulling out a body camera smaller than a pack of cigarettes. "Document everything, trust nothing. That's my motto." Friday evening brought the breakthrough we needed. Yorsh's dog suddenly required an unusually long walk past the community center during Delilah's emergency neighborhood safety meeting. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, we could see her addressing 15 residents using a PowerPoint presentation with photos of my property circled in angry red. The autumn air carried her voice clearly through partially open windows. "Property values are our primary concern, but safety comes first. We have a resident displaying aggressive tendencies, violating community standards, demonstrating disrespectful behavior toward longtime residents. She was systematically destroying my reputation, painting me as a dangerous outsider threatening their suburban paradise." The presentation included photos of my non-conforming mailbox, my unauthorized landscaping, even my truck parked in my own driveway. Apparently evidence of commercial vehicle violations. Then she made the mistake that would cost her everything. "I've been in real estate 15 years, Delilah continued, clicking to her next slide. "I know how one problem property can devastate neighborhood equity. We're protecting your retirement investments, your children's inheritance, the financial security you've spent decades building." Her slide showed neighborhood property values declining over 5 years, marked in ominous red. What she didn't know was that Jorge's IT background meant he could spot manipulated data from space. "Those numbers are complete bullshit," Jorge whispered, body camera still recording. "I pulled comparable sales data last month for our refinancing. Willowbrook property values have increased 12% over 3 years. We had her, red-handed, using fabricated financial data to manipulate frightened homeowners into supporting organized harassment. The meeting ended with Delilah scheduling an emergency HOA board session for Tuesday. Topic: immediate action required for community safety. That night, my garage became mission control. Ruth arrived with her evidence folders, Jorge brought his laptop, and I supplied coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while we spread documents across my workbench like generals planning D-Day. "She's panicking," Ruth observed, studying petition signatures through reading glasses that made her look like a scholarly assassin. "This acceleration feels desperate, like someone's pressuring her to resolve this situation fast." Jorge's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up real estate databases. "Check this out. Prestige Properties has 3 Willowbrook houses under contract right now, all priced 15 to 20% below market. If property values are supposedly dropping because of Marcus, that actually supports her business model perfectly." The smell of conspiracy hung in the air like stale cigarette smoke. Delilah wasn't just harassing me for kicks. She was manufacturing a neighborhood crisis to justify below-market purchases and profitable flips. Every family she'd driven away had sold cheap to her company, artificially depressing values long enough for strategic acquisitions. Tuesday's emergency meeting was going to be very interesting indeed. Tuesday arrived like Judgment Day, crisp autumn air carrying the scent of dying leaves and dying lies. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. in the community center, that beige temple to suburban conformity reeking of industrial carpet cleaner and 30 years of petty grievances. By 6:30, the parking lot was packed tighter than a military mess hall, more residents than I'd seen since moving to Willowbrook. Delilah had orchestrated a public execution, mine. I arrived precisely at 7, wearing my dress blues, not the uniform but my best Navy shirt and the confidence that came with 20 years of facing hostile situations. Ruth flanked my left in her courtroom pantsuit. Jorge covered my right with recording devices hidden like a one-man surveillance team. The community center hummed with nervous energy that tasted like copper pennies and fear. 40-plus residents filled metal folding chairs, their conversations dying as we entered. Whispered fragments floated through the air. "That's him. Property values. Finally something's being done." Delilah commanded the front podium like a general addressing troops, her armor consisting of a navy blazer, perfect blonde hair, and a projection screen displaying the HOA logo beside tonight's agenda. Emergency action, community safety, and property value protection. Behind her sat the board of suburban dictators. Cornelius Blackwood with his country club tan and polo shirt uniform. Sandra Mills clutching a legal pad like a shield. Robert Jules avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Delilah began, her honey-over-broken glass voice filling the space. "We face a serious threat requiring immediate community action." Click. My house appeared on the giant screen like a wanted poster. Red arrows attacking my mailbox, my flower beds, my driveway where my truck sat like evidence of moral decay. "Over the past month," she continued, advancing slides that made my property look like a suburban crime scene, "we've documented multiple violations by Mr. Marcus Hendricks. Non-conforming structures, unauthorized modifications, commercial vehicle infractions, and most concerning, aggressive, threatening behavior toward longtime residents." The crowd's disapproval hit me like a physical wave. "Mrs." Patterson shook her gray head sadly. The Johnsons whispered behind cupped hands like they were discussing a terminal diagnosis. My jaw clenched until it ached. The taste of injustice is bitter as black coffee mixed with battery acid. "But the real crisis," Delilah's voice dropped to manufactured urgency, "is the devastating impact on your property values. Recent analysis shows a dangerous downward trend directly linked to these ongoing violations." Her next slide displayed the falsified data Jorge had identified. Property values supposedly plummeting since my arrival, my move-in date marked like the beginning of a plague. That's when Ruth struck like a legal lightning bolt. "Point of order," her voice cut through the room with courtroom authority honed over decades. "As a property owner and former paralegal, I demand to examine the methodology behind that so-called analysis." Delilah's smile flickered like a dying fluorescent bulb. "Mrs. Kowalski, we're following proper meeting procedures, which include the right to challenge fraudulent data presented as fact," Ruth interrupted, her folder snapping open like a trap. "Because according to actual MLS records, Willowbrook property values have increased 12% over 3 years, making this one of the county's most stable neighborhoods." She marched forward and slammed printouts onto the board table. The sharp crack echoed through sudden silence. "These are official sales records, not manipulated propaganda designed to create panic." The crowd's energy shifted like a storm front moving in. Whispers turned questioning. Heads swiveled between Ruth and Delilah. The scent of doubt began overpowering the smell of fear. Delilah's composure cracked visibly. "While we appreciate Mrs. Kowalski's amateur research, the board relies on professional market analysis, considering factors beyond simple Like the fact that Prestige Properties bought 3 homes here at below market prices? Jorge stood up, his tech worker precision cutting through her stammering. All from families harassed into selling after mysterious HOA violations appeared overnight? Now the crowd was turning ugly. Faces that had been hostile toward me were becoming suspicious of the board. The metallic taste of mob mentality filled the air. Delilah's mask shattered completely. "Mr. Santos, you're completely out of order. This meeting addresses community safety, not your ridiculous conspiracy theories." "Conspiracy?" I rose slowly, letting 20 years of military bearing fill my voice with authority that made the room go dead silent. "Like the conspiracy to forge HOA bylaws that don't exist?" I opened my folder like I was drawing a weapon. "According to the original 1987 incorporation documents, 90% of your so-called violations are complete fiction." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Cornelius looked like he'd swallowed a golf ball. Sandra's pen trembled against her legal pad. "Furthermore," I continued, pulling out screenshots from Jorge's surveillance footage, "we have documented proof of systematic harassment designed to force below-market sales to Prestige Properties." The room erupted. 40 voices shouting questions, accusations, demands for explanations. The carefully orchestrated execution had become a lynch mob, with Delilah as the target. "This is inappropriate," she screamed over the chaos, clicking her remote frantically like it could restore her control. "These are baseless accusations from a disgruntled resident. The only thing that's baseless," Ruth's voice cut through the noise like a judge's gavel, "is every lie you've told this community while stealing their money and manipulating their property values." Delilah's face went chalk white beneath her makeup. Her hands shook as she clutched the podium. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the room's chill. The crowd smelled blood in the water now, circling like sharks around their former queen. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The chaos in the community center was beautiful, but I needed silence for what came next. I pulled out my phone and played a single audio clip through the room's sound system. Jorge had helped me hack into it earlier. Delilah's voice filled the space, crystal clear from last week's recording. "The Hendricks situation needs to be resolved quickly. We have 3 closings scheduled next month, and buyers are getting nervous about neighborhood stability. If we can't move this property within 60 days, we'll need to consider more direct action." The room went tomb quiet. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "That was recorded last Tuesday," I announced, during a phone conversation between Delilah Thornburg and an unknown associate discussing timeline pressures for my forced removal. But Ruth was already moving to the kill shot. She'd been saving this moment for weeks. "What Marcus doesn't know yet," Ruth said, pulling out a thick folder that landed on the board table with the weight of a death sentence, "is that I've been conducting my own investigation into HOA finances." She opened the folder like she was revealing nuclear launch codes. "As a property owner, I have legal right to examine all HOA financial records." What I found was illuminating. Ruth pulled out bank statements, photocopied checks, contractor invoices, a paper trail that made Delilah's face go from pale to green. Over the past 3 years, the HOA has paid $47,000 to Thornburg Consulting Services for landscaping and maintenance work. Ruth's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades building legal cases. "The problem is, none of this work was ever performed." She held up photographs of the neighborhood taken monthly over 3 years. No landscaping changes, no maintenance improvements, no work orders, no crew schedules, no equipment rentals, just $47,000 in HOA funds transferred directly to Delilah's private business account. The crowd erupted again, but this time the anger was laser-focused. 40 neighbors who'd been paying inflated HOA fees while their treasurer embezzled their money. "But wait, there's more," Ruth continued like a prosecuting attorney delivering closing arguments. "Cornelius Blackwood signed off on every single payment without board approval, violating both HOA bylaws and state fiduciary responsibility laws." Cornelius shot to his feet, his country club composure finally cracking. "Now hold on, Ruth. Those payments were for consulting services?" "Consulting on what?" Jorge interrupted, pulling out his laptop. "Because I pulled the incorporation documents for Thornburg Consulting Services. It was created 6 months after Delilah became HOA treasurer, and it lists only one type of business activity: real estate market analysis." The pieces were clicking together for everyone in the room now. You could see the understanding dawning on faces throughout the crowd, the realization that they'd been systematically robbed. "So let me understand this," called out Mr. Peterson from the back row, his voice shaking with rage. Delilah's been using our HOA fees to pay her fake company for fake consulting work, while using her real estate business to manipulate property values and force below-market sales? That's exactly right, I said, my voice cutting through the crowd noise. And every family that's been harassed into selling over the past 3 years has been a victim of organized fraud, not HOA enforcement. The metallic taste in my mouth was gone, replaced by something sweeter, the taste of justice finally being served. Delilah stood frozen at the podium like a deer in headlights, her carefully constructed world collapsing in real time. This wasn't just about my mailbox anymore. This wasn't even about neighborhood harassment. This was about a criminal enterprise that had been stealing from an entire community while destroying lives for profit. And in that moment, I realized my role had changed completely. I wasn't just defending my property anymore. I was leading a community uprising against organized corruption. The real war was just beginning. The community center emptied like a building on fire, but 15 residents stayed behind. The core group who'd heard enough evidence to know we were dealing with organized crime, not neighborhood disputes. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as we rearranged chairs into a war council circle. Ruth took charge like the retired paralegal she was. First things first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with legally. This isn't just civil fraud anymore. We're looking at criminal conspiracy, embezzlement, and potentially federal mail fraud charges. Jorge pulled out his laptop, fingers already flying across keys. I can handle the digital evidence preservation. Everything we've recorded, photographed, or documented needs to be backed up in multiple secure locations before they realize how much we know. Mrs. Patterson, who'd seemed like one of Delilah's supporters just an hour ago, leaned forward with steel in her voice. That woman cost me 3 friends who moved away after her harassment campaigns. I want to help however I can. Over the next 2 weeks, my garage became mission headquarters. The space smelled like coffee, determination, and WD-40 from my workbench, where legal documents spread across surfaces normally reserved for fixing lawnmowers. Ruth established herself as our legal strategist. Jorge handled technical surveillance, and I coordinated with law enforcement and media contacts. Our first breakthrough came when Ruth discovered the State Attorney General's office had a dedicated HOA fraud task force. Apparently, we weren't the first community dealing with systematic corruption by board members. Detective Sarah Morrison specializes in these cases, Ruth explained during one of our evening strategy sessions. She told me they've been tracking a pattern of HOA financial crimes across 3 counties, but they need communities willing to come forward with evidence. Jorge's technical skills proved invaluable for building our case. He'd installed a discreet network of cameras around the neighborhood, all legal, all on private property with homeowner permission, creating a surveillance web that documented every suspicious activity. "Look at this," Jorge said, pulling up footage from the past month. Delilah's made 17 unscheduled visits to properties that later received violation notices. She's literally scouting for problems to create. But the real game changer was my steel mailbox project. 20 years of Navy engineering experience had taught me that the best defense is often an irresistible offense. If Delilah wanted to keep destroying mailboxes, I'd give her a target she couldn't resist and couldn't damage. The design process took me back to my Seabees days, when we built structures that could withstand everything from hurricanes to hostile fire. Marine-grade steel formed the core, welded with joints stronger than ship hulls. The decorative oak exterior would hide the steel infrastructure, making it look identical to my grandfather's original design. But the real innovation was the technology package Jorge helped me integrate. "We're basically building the world's most sophisticated mailbox," Jorge explained as we worked in my garage, the smell of cutting oil and electronics filling the air. Motion sensors, high-definition cameras with night vision, impact detectors that automatically alert police, and GPS tracking devices hidden in false compartments. The technical specifications read like military hardware, pressure sensors calibrated to detect sledgehammer impacts, cameras with 4K resolution and infrared capability, cellular connectivity that bypassed local internet to prevent tampering, and battery backup systems that could run for weeks without external power. More importantly, the mailbox would be completely legal under HOA bylaws. Same dimensions, same setback, same oak exterior finish. Delilah would have no grounds for violation notices, but she'd be unable to resist the challenge. "It's a trap," Ruth observed, watching me weld the steel frame together. The bright arc of the welding torch cast dancing shadows across the garage walls. "You're giving her exactly what she wants, a target, while making it impossible for her to succeed." Meanwhile, our community organizing efforts gained momentum. Mrs. Patterson became our neighborhood coordinator, quietly building a network of residents who'd been victims of Delilah's schemes over the years. Each conversation revealed more evidence of systematic harassment. The Watanabe family had been cited for culturally inappropriate landscaping when they planted a traditional Japanese garden. The Rodriguez family faced excessive noise violations for speaking Spanish in their backyard. The pattern was clear. Anyone who didn't fit Delilah's vision of suburban homogeneity became a target. Detective Morrison helped us understand the legal framework we were building toward. HOA board members have fiduciary duty to community members, she explained during our formal interview. When they use their position for personal financial gain, that's not just civil violation, it's criminal fraud. She outlined the charges we could potentially support. Embezzlement for the fake consulting payments, conspiracy for the coordinated harassment campaigns, mail fraud for using official HOA communications to further illegal schemes, and civil rights violations for the discriminatory enforcement patterns. The key is proving intent, Morrison continued. We need evidence that this wasn't just poor judgment, but deliberate criminal activity. That evidence was mounting daily. Horsch's surveillance network captured Delilah meeting with contractors to discuss property improvement opportunities in houses that hadn't sold yet. Ruth's financial analysis revealed payment patterns that coincided perfectly with harassment campaigns. My steel mailbox was nearly complete, a monument to engineering overkill that would serve as the perfect bait for our trap. Everything was falling into place for the final confrontation. Delilah's desperation manifested like a fever breaking, hot, messy, and completely irrational. The morning after our community center confrontation, I found my truck's tires slashed, all four of them hissing deflated rubber against my driveway like dying animals. The cuts were precise, professional, made with something sharper than a kitchen knife, the metallic scent of exposed steel belting mixed with the acrid smell of leaking air. Horsch's security cameras had captured everything. 2:47 a.m., dark figure in a hoodie, moving with practiced efficiency. The face was obscured, but the body language was pure Delilah, that particular way she held her shoulders when she thought she was being clever. She's escalating faster than we anticipated, Ruth observed that afternoon, studying the footage on Jorge's laptop in my garage. The space still smelled like cutting oil from my steel mailbox project, now nearing completion in the corner like a sleeping metal beast. But tire slashing was amateur hour compared to what came next. Wednesday morning brought a building inspector to my door. Not the friendly city guys I'd dealt with before, but a stone-faced official from the county carrying a thick folder and a bad attitude. Marcus Hendricks, we've received complaints about unpermitted construction activities. I need to inspect your property for code violations. The complaint, filed anonymously, claimed I was operating an illegal welding business, storing hazardous materials without proper permits, and constructing unauthorized military-grade fortifications that violated residential zoning laws. Every accusation was technically true and completely misleading. I did have welding equipment, standard homeowner stuff. I did store propane and cutting gas for legitimate projects. And yes, my mailbox design could probably stop a tank, but it was still just a mailbox. The inspector spent 3 hours measuring, photographing, and documenting everything in my garage with the thoroughness of a crime scene technician. His clipboard scratched against paper like fingernails on a chalkboard as he noted every tool, every material, every project. You'll need permits for the welding setup, he concluded, handing me a violation notice thicker than a magazine. Cease all construction activities until proper documentation is filed and approved. That's a 60-day minimum process, assuming no complications. 60 days would put us well past Delilah's real estate closing deadlines. Clever. But that afternoon brought the nuclear option. A process server at my door with papers that made my stomach drop like a broken elevator. Marcus Hendricks? You're being served with a restraining order and emergency injunction. The documents, filed by concerned Willowbrook residents, claimed I posed an immediate physical threat to neighborhood safety. The petition included sworn affidavits from 12 residents describing my increasingly erratic and aggressive behavior, my obsession with surveillance equipment, and my construction of weapons-grade defensive structures. The restraining order prohibited me from attending HOA meetings, approaching board members, or engaging in any activities that could be construed as intimidation or harassment. The emergency injunction froze all construction on my property and required removal of unauthorized surveillance equipment within 48 hours. Both documents were signed by Judge Harold Pemberton, Cornelius Blackwood's golf buddy and country club drinking partner. The taste of corruption is unmistakable once you recognize it. Bitter as burnt coffee mixed with stomach acid. That evening, our war council convened in Horsch's garage instead of mine. The space smelled like electronic components and righteous anger as we spread the legal documents across his workbench like battle plans. "This is checkmate territory," Ruth said, her paralegal training evident in how she dissected each page. "They're using the legal system as a weapon, and they have a friendly judge rubber-stamping everything." Jorge pulled up his surveillance footage from the past week, his fingers dancing across keyboard shortcuts with programmer precision. "Look at this pattern. Delilah's been making rounds again, but this time she's carrying official-looking documents and a clipboard." The footage showed her visiting the same 12 houses whose residents had signed the restraining order affidavits. Each visit lasted exactly 15 minutes. Each homeowner looked uncomfortable, sometimes argumentative, but ultimately signed whatever she put in front of them. "Coercion," I said, recognizing the tactic from my military training. "She's leveraging something to force compliance." "Property tax assessments," Ruth realized suddenly, pulling out her own research folder. 3 of these addresses received significant assessment increases in the past 6 months. 2 others have been flagged for landscape violations that could trigger fines. Jorge's laptop chimed with an incoming message from Detective Morrison. "Emergency meeting requested. New developments in your case. Can you come in tonight?" The drive to the sheriff's office tasted like approaching thunderstorms, electric anticipation mixed with the metallic tang of adrenaline. The fluorescent lights in Morrison's office buzzed overhead like angry insects as she spread new evidence across her desk. "We've been conducting parallel investigations based on your information," Morrison explained, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too much corruption. "What we found changes everything." She pulled out bank records, phone logs, and real estate documents that made our amateur detective work look like finger painting. "Delilah Thornburg isn't just stealing from your HOA," Morrison continued. "She's been running this same scam across 7 different communities over the past 5 years. We're looking at organized criminal enterprise territory now. Federal charges, RICO predicate acts, the whole 9 yards." The steel mailbox waiting in my garage suddenly felt less like a trap and more like the key to bringing down an entire criminal network. Detective Morrison's revelation changed the entire battlefield, but Delilah didn't know the federal net was closing around her, which made her final gambit both predictable and catastrophically stupid. Thursday morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling down Maple Street. Through my bedroom window, I watched a convoy approach. Delilah's white Escalade leading 2 commercial trucks, a tree service company and what looked like a demolition crew. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth as I grabbed my phone and started recording. Jorge's surveillance system had already triggered alerts, automatically uploading live footage to cloud storage as the vehicles parked directly in front of my house. The tree service truck bore logos for Greenwood Professional Services, but the demolition equipment looked military surplus, the kind of gear you'd use to clear roadside bombs, not trim hedges. Delilah climbed out of her Escalade wearing designer work clothes that had never seen actual work, clipboard in hand like she was conducting an official inspection. Behind her emerged 3 men who moved with the casual violence of people comfortable breaking things for money. "Morning, Marcus," she called out with fake cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. "Emergency HOA maintenance, we're removing the hazardous tree-threatening power lines, plus addressing some unauthorized structures." There was no hazardous tree. The nearest power line was 50 feet away, and the only unauthorized structure was my nearly complete steel mailbox, sitting in the garage like a sleeping giant. But Delilah had learned from previous mistakes. This time, she had paperwork. "Emergency Work Order 2024-118, she announced, waving official-looking documents. "Approved by the county for immediate safety concerns. You can review the permits while we work." The permits were real. I could see the county seal from across the yard. Somehow she'd convinced municipal officials that my property posed imminent danger, requiring emergency intervention. Jorge appeared at his front door, already recording with his phone while his hidden camera system captured every angle. Ruth emerged from her house 2 doors down, walking with the determined pace of someone ready for legal combat. But this time, Delilah was ready for our resistance. "Oh, and Marcus," she continued with that smile that belonged in a shark documentary, "Judge Pemberton signed an expanded restraining order this morning. Any interference with emergency safety operations constitutes criminal contempt of court." She handed me new papers, still warm from the printer. The expanded order prohibited me from obstructing, interfering with, or documenting any HOA-authorized maintenance activities. Taking photos or videos could result in immediate arrest. The demolition crew was already unloading equipment, industrial sledgehammers, pneumatic drills, cutting torches that hissed with compressed gas. The scent of diesel exhaust mixed with acetylene created a toxic cloud that made my eyes water. "This is insane," Jorge called out from his driveway. "You can't just demolish someone's property based on fake permits." "Mr. Santos," Delilah's voice carried across the morning air like a legal threat, "you're welcome to file complaints through proper channels, but this work order takes precedence over personal opinions." The crew moved with professional efficiency toward my garage, where my steel mailbox waited like a metallic prize. Their leader, a thick-necked man with scarred hands and dead eyes, examined the structure with the appreciation of someone who understood engineering. "This is going to take some serious equipment," he told Delilah, running experienced fingers along the welded joints. "Marine-grade steel, military-spec construction. We're talking hours, not minutes." "Just get it done," Delilah snapped, her composure cracking slightly. "We have deadlines to meet." That's when I realized her fatal mistake. The restraining order prevented me from interfering, but it said nothing about my invited guests. And Detective Morrison had given me very specific instructions for this exact scenario. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number she'd programmed into my contacts. "Morrison, this is Marcus. The package is being delivered as scheduled. Repeat, the package is being delivered." Within 30 seconds, unmarked vehicles began appearing at both ends of Maple Street. Not obvious police cars, but the kind of generic sedans that screamed federal law enforcement to anyone who knew what to look for. The demolition crew noticed immediately. Their casual confidence evaporated as they realized they were being watched by professionals who outranked local judges and HOA permits. "Ma'am," the crew leader said to Delilah, his voice suddenly uncertain, "we might want to reconsider this timeline. Seems like we've got some complications developing." But Delilah was too deep in her own desperation to read the battlefield correctly. "Complications? We have legal authority and emergency permits. Start cutting." The first blow from the industrial sledgehammer rang against my steel mailbox like a church bell announcing Judgment Day. The impact sent vibrations through the garage floor that I could feel in my bones, but the mailbox didn't even dent. The second blow produced sparks and a metallic clang that echoed through the neighborhood like a dinner bell for justice. The third blow cracked the sledgehammer handle. That's when Detective Morrison stepped out of the lead sedan, badge visible and backup spreading across my yard like a perfectly choreographed arrest operation. "Delilah Thornburg," she called out, her voice carrying federal authority. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and violation of civil rights under color of law. The taste of victory is sweeter than any revenge I could have imagined." The arrest happened in slow motion, like watching a building collapse in reverse. 30 years of suburban tyranny crumbling into handcuffs and Miranda rights. Detective Morrison's badge caught the morning sunlight as she approached Delilah, who stood frozen beside my indestructible mailbox like a deer caught in legal headlights. The demolition crew had backed away from their equipment, hands visible, recognizing federal authority when they saw it. "Delilah Thornburg, you have the right to remain silent," Morrison's voice carried across the neighborhood with the finality of a judge's gavel. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." But Delilah wasn't going quietly. "This is harassment," she screamed, her perfectly styled blonde hair finally showing cracks in its armor. "I'm conducting legally authorized HOA business under emergency municipal permits." Morrison held up a different set of papers, federal warrants that made county permits look like grocery lists. These emergency permits were obtained through fraudulent representations to city officials. That's a felony. By now, the entire neighborhood had emerged. 40-plus residents lined the street like spectators at the world's most satisfying sporting event. Mrs. Patterson stood on her front porch with her arms crossed, no longer the timid victim of Delilah's propaganda. Jorge recorded everything from his driveway, his security system capturing multiple angles of justice finally being served. Ruth approached with her evidence folder, now thick enough to stop bullets. "Detective Morrison, we have additional documentation of the financial crimes." But the real crowd pleaser came when Cornelius Blackwood's BMW came screeching around the corner, country club composure completely abandoned. He climbed out wearing golf clothes and panic, clearly having received an emergency phone call. "Delilah, what the hell is happening here?" he demanded, then noticed the federal agents and went pale beneath his artificial tan. "Mr. Blackwood, Morrison said with professional courtesy that carried the weight of inevitability. "We'll need you to come with us as well. You're facing charges of conspiracy and aiding and abetting fraud." The demolition crew leader had been quietly packing equipment while trying to become invisible. Morrison gestured to her backup officers. "Mr. Vincent Torres, you're also under arrest for criminal conspiracy and destruction of property." "Wait, what?" Torres dropped a sledgehammer that clanged against concrete like a gavel. "Lady, I just work here. She hired us through legitimate channels." "Legitimate channels that you knew were being used to commit crimes," Morrison replied. "Your crew has been documented destroying property at 6 different locations based on fraudulent work orders." That's when the local news van arrived. Channel 7's investigative reporter, Sarah Jules, had been following our story since Jorge contacted her 2 weeks ago. Her camera crew captured everything: Delilah in handcuffs, Cornelius trying to hide behind his BMW, the demolition equipment that couldn't dent my steel mailbox, and 40 neighbors who'd finally seen their suburban dictator brought to justice. This is Sarah Jules reporting live from Willowbrook subdivision. Her voice carried professional authority as she addressed the camera, where federal agents have arrested the HOA treasurer and president for what appears to be a multi-year fraud scheme targeting homeowners. She turned to me, microphone extended. "Mr. Hendricks, you've been at the center of this investigation. Can you tell us how this all started?" The taste of vindication flooded my mouth as I faced the camera, surrounded by neighbors who'd gone from hostile to supportive in the span of 2 weeks. "It started with a mailbox," I said, gesturing toward my steel monument to engineering overkill. My grandfather's design that Delilah Thornburg decided didn't meet her personal standards. What we discovered was that she'd been systematically stealing from this community, while manipulating property values for her own profit. "The federal charges are extensive," Jules continued, consulting her notes. "Embezzlement, conspiracy, mail fraud, and civil rights violations. Sources indicate this scheme may have affected multiple communities across 3 counties. Delilah, now seated in the back of a federal vehicle, made one last desperate play. She rolled down the window and screamed at the gathered crowd, "You people have no idea what you've done. Property values will collapse without proper management. This neighborhood will become a slum." The crowd's response was immediate and visceral, 40 voices shouting variations of "good riddance" and "take your property values and shove them." Mrs. Patterson actually applauded. But my favorite moment came when Ruth stepped forward, her paralegal training evident in how she addressed the camera with legal precision. "What Miss Thornburg fails to understand," Ruth said, her voice carrying decades of courtroom experience, "is that real property values come from community trust, not fear and manipulation. She destroyed that trust the moment she started stealing from her neighbors." As the federal vehicles pulled away, taking Delilah and Cornelius toward their first court appearances, the neighborhood felt different. The oppressive weight of tyranny had lifted, replaced by something I hadn't experienced since moving to Willowbrook: actual community. Jorge clapped me on the shoulder, his grin wide enough to split his face. "So, what are you going to do with that indestructible mailbox now?" I looked at my steel monument, scarred but unbroken, standing like a metallic middle finger to suburban oppression. "I think it's going to become a neighborhood landmark," I said, "a reminder that sometimes you have to build something unbreakable to break something that needed breaking." 6 months later, I stood in my driveway at sunrise, coffee steaming in the crisp morning air, watching my neighborhood wake up without fear for the first time in years. Delilah got 5 years federal prison. Cornelius received 3 years and a lifetime ban from HOA boards. Torres flipped for 18 months plus community service. Judge Pemberton's judicial career ended faster than his golf handicap improved. But those sentences weren't the real victory. The real victory was watching Mrs. Patterson plant roses without checking over her shoulder, hearing the Rodriguez kids laughing in Spanish without lowering their voices, seeing Jorge's teenager practice guitar on the front porch while neighbors actually stopped to listen. The emergency HOA election in January drew every single resident, first time in Willowbrook's history. Ruth won treasurer unanimously, Jorge became secretary, and somehow the guy who'd built an indestructible mailbox got elected president. Our first act was burning Delilah's 30-page rulebook and replacing it with 3 pages of reasonable guidelines that actual humans had helped write. Every change required public hearings and majority approval. Revolutionary concept, democracy in suburbia. The recovered money, $47,000 in embezzled funds, plus $23,000 in fraudulent fines, created the Willowbrook Community Justice Scholarship. Every year, we send a local kid to law school with one mission: fight HOA abuse and protect homeowner rights. Maria Santos, Jorge's daughter, was our first recipient. Watching her accept that scholarship made my chest tight with pride for this community we'd accidentally built. My steel mailbox became our unofficial monument. Neighbors call it Fort Knox now, use it for directions, bring visiting relatives to take photos. The city tourism board listed it as a local point of interest, which still makes me laugh every time I check my mail. But the healing, that's what really mattered. Mrs. Patterson hosts weekly coffee mornings where people actually talk about problems instead of whispering about them. The Henderson's son plays guitar requests from neighbors who used to call noise complaints. 3 families who'd been planning to move decided to stay and fight for their home instead of fleeing it. May brought our first Willowbrook Unity Day, centered around my ridiculous mailbox and featuring food trucks, live music, and a smash-your-own mailbox booth where people destroyed cardboard replicas with foam hammers. Kids lined up for blocks, lined. Adults laughed until they cried. We raised $12,000 for the scholarship fund. The event attracted visitors from 6 neighboring communities dealing with their own suburban tyrants. Word was spreading. Willowbrook had cracked the code on fighting back. Detective Morrison speaks at our monthly meetings now, teaching other communities how to document abuse and build criminal cases. "You created a template being used nationwide," she told us at our celebration dinner. "You've probably saved thousands of families from similar harassment." The stress I'd carried for months without realizing it, that constant metallic taste of adrenaline, the way my shoulders never fully relaxed, finally lifted. My garage smells like sawdust and linseed oil again, like Gramps' workshop instead of battle preparations. Jorge and I started Santos and Hendricks Home Services, helping neighbors with projects that used to require HOA approval forms and 3-week waiting periods. Ruth opened a legal aid clinic for HOA disputes, offering free consultations countywide. We'd accidentally created a support network that extended far beyond our subdivision. The documentary crew arrived in March. David vs. Goliath in Suburbia hits streaming platforms next year, with proceeds supporting the National Homeowner Protection Foundation. Apparently, our little mailbox war had attracted national attention, but the sweetest vindication came from an unexpected source: property values. 6 months post-Delilah, Willowbrook home values increased 18%, highest growth in the county. Turns out people actually want to live where they don't have to fear their own government. The constant for sale signs of Delilah's era vanished. Families started improving instead of escaping. My steel mailbox still stands guard, scarred but unbroken, collecting mail and admiration in equal measure. Sometimes I catch neighbors taking selfies with it, treating it like a monument to the radical idea that ordinary people can defeat extraordinary corruption. Standing here now, watching my community wake up free, I taste something better than revenge, sweeter than victory. I taste hope. If you're fighting your own HOA nightmare, remember this. Document everything. Find your allies. Build something they can't break. And never underestimate the power of neighbors who've had enough. Share your HOA horror story in the comments. Let's build a community of fighters. And subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales of little guys taking down suburban tyrants. Because justice shared is justice multiplied.